Hi, my name's Allie. First of all, I'd like to apologize for the coat and being outside. It's cold, but my siblings are inside and there's a lot going on. It's not a very big house, so I wanted to give it out here so that you could hear me well. The name of my speech is Parental Pressure. So, to open it up on my intro, parents really do love their kids, and I want to state that before I go any farther, because this speech is going to seem a little iffy on that subject. But obviously, parents love their kids, and they want to do everything that they can for their children. But sometimes the expectations that parents have and that people have are not the best, because usually when a child has a parent, then people are expecting them to turn out like that parent or be similar to that parent. And that kind of an attitude can be damaging for a child of any age, really. So, children grow up with or without their parents. And that's a proverb that I looked up. And I wanted to state that here because whether you expect your child to be like you or someone else expects your child to be like you, or any expectations you have of your child, they're going to grow up. And if you are not going to be a part of their lives because you're not supporting what they're doing, then they're going to leave you behind in the dust. Or if you don't want them to grow up and you're holding on to them, they're going to leave you behind. Because you can't stop a kid from growing up. You can do your best to prepare a kid for growing up, but you're never going to be able to stop a kid from growing up. And the pressure and expectations that can come with that can be a little damaging to a child. Always growing up, I was expected to be like my parents. And you might be thinking, oh, are my parents successful? And that was a lot of pressure. Quite the opposite. Both of my parents are very interesting individuals, but successful is not a word probably used to describe them. Parents and adults expect their kids to be like them, and that's just not the situation for me, because I'm very different from my parents in a lot of aspects. And some of those aspects, I don't follow their lifestyles. I'm very different from them in my beliefs, my systems, what I find important, and I'm just generally more accepting than either of them, and I make a little bit better of decisions sometimes. So, the first story that I want to get into is the story about my mom. If some of you had me in the same class as me in original speech, then you would have heard my impromptu speech about the hardest moment in my life, and that was leaving my mom's house. So when I was in 5th grade, I was removed from my mom's house by DCS. So they went to my school, they picked me up, called me out of class, and I was taken by a police officer to the DCS office in Brazil. And when I walked in, my dad was there. And I hadn't seen my dad for a few months at this point, so it was really scary for me to see him almost. I wasn't expecting that. It was not something that my brain could figure out what was going on. Because the policeman didn't tell me anything. I was walking in, my dad's here. And so, basically they're telling me I have to go with him. I don't have a choice. This is the only option for me. So I do. I go with him. And there were their own issues, but that's not part of this story. I don't know what happened to my mom. I ask questions, but I'm only about 10 at this point, so they don't want to answer all my questions. They don't want me to know exactly what happened, but I do eventually find out that my mom was using drugs and got caught and arrested. And so she wasn't making the best decisions. It wasn't necessarily something that I blame her for still today, but still, she wasn't making the best decisions. She made a mistake, and she continued to make that mistake for a while. So I didn't see my mom for about 2-3 years after that incident. So I didn't see my mom until 7th or 8th grade. And during those times, we used to go to weekly visits because they still want you to be able to see your parent. So I would go to weekly visits and see if she would show up. And she did pretty well for the first month. And then she just stopped showing up. She didn't cancel, she just didn't show up. And so that was also a decision that she made that I would not make in my life. And the reason for that story is I won't make a decision like that. I don't think I'll make a decision like that, and I have the expectation from people around me, from people that know my mom, to make a decision like that. People think I grow up in a house where drugs are being used, and I was a kid, but they were still being used in the same house as me, and think that that is going to be what happens to me. And that's not going to happen to me. Thus far, I'm not on the same track my mom was at all. I'm completely separate from her. She was smart. She did not take the classes I take. She did not do the activities I did. She did not have the friends that I had. She was not in the same situation. But still, I had that expectation that I'm going to be like her from other people. So that's been one that has been damaging. Because think about it. Think about how you're trying to be an A+ student, trying to do your best that you can, and suddenly people are putting these expectations on you that you're going to fail. You're not going to have a successful life. You're going to end up on drugs. Like, that's the kind of expectations I was getting from people around me. So it was damaging for me, I would say, to hear what people were saying. And on top of that, I just wasn't okay with that. The idea of that was what I was striving away from, and the fact that people still had that expectation was upsetting. So I'm going to do a flip here and go to a bit of funnier of a story about my dad, because I'm not really like my dad either. I probably do act more like my dad, but I still wouldn't say it's significant enough to say that I'm like my dad. My dad is a little bit of a pyromaniac, and I say a little bit of a pyromaniac because he's only had the fire department called on him 3 times, and once we get into double digits, I would say that's where we're having more of an issue. The first time, we have woods behind our house between a highway, so it's not very thick. The trees are not super lively. There's lots of, pollution coming off the highway, and so they're not the best. And my dad decided he wanted to set a pit of junk back there on fire, and he ended up setting all the trees on fire for about 30 or 40 feet with it. And that did not work out very well for him. He was not in the right at all. He completely was angry. He was saying that he didn't do anything wrong, but he did, because we were on city limits. We're not supposed to have fires anyways, and we still had that huge fire, and he got the fire department called on him, and they were very upset. The second time, he had a leaf fire. Still, we're not allowed to do that, but it wasn't as bad as the first one. And they dumped 1,000 gallons of water on this leaf fire that's probably about as big around as my arms, if you can see that. And so the ground was really mushy, and they drove all the way back on our property. So they could not get off of our property because the mud had sunk and the wheels were stuck. They were just spinning out in the ground. So my dad was very, very angry about this, and he would not let them bring a tow truck onto the land. So they had to figure out how to extend the tow truck's tow and connect it to the fire truck so they could get their truck off the land. And yeah, that was not a good day for the fire department. I get it. I would want to drive my fire truck onto the land and soak his yard too, but they got in trouble for that one. They got stuck in our yard, couldn't get out, and they ended up having to fix the ruts they left in our yard because of this. The third time was actually recently, it was this year, and he set our whole side yard on fire. I walked out there to walk my dog, and all the grass was burnt, and there was still a fire going, even if the firefighters had missed, apparently. So yeah, he does this quite frequently. This is one of his favorite things to do. He likes setting things on fire. He's kind of known for it. And lawnmowers, but that's, once again, a different story that I'm not getting into right now. And so I would say that I don't make decisions like that either, but I've been held to that standard. People have been like, oh no, you can't have a lighter. We've seen what your dad does. Or, oh, no, that's not okay. You can't light candles. You can't have a candle in your room. We know how your dad is. Which, I've never shown any interest in wanting a lighter or a candle in my room necessarily. But the fact that I can't do it because my dad likes to set things on fire is a little upsetting. And when he was a kid, he did the same thing. He set a cornfield on fire, the firework. So some teachers at school knew about him, and my dad went here. He went to North High School. So I just am glad I don't have the same last name and nobody catches that I'm related. So, yeah. But when people do know I'm related to him, I'm held to the same standard. Like, oh, you're the oldest and you're James's kid? Ooh, yeah, you're probably gonna be a terror. You're gonna be wild. Like, you're gonna do some crazy stuff in high school, which hasn't happened. I pretty much sit in my room all the time. Not very social. I talk to maybe 3 people a day, if that, counting my parents. So it doesn't really happen. It doesn't happen like that. And with all this being said, really, like, the reason that I can speak out about this is honestly because I've always been compared to my parents. mostly my mom and my dad. I have a stepmom. I'm not really compared to her, so that's why I say that. But I'm compared to them a lot. And people are afraid I'm going to make the same mistakes, the same decisions, or the same problems that they have created or caused or decided to make. And that's just simply not going to happen. And the reason that you shouldn't compare children to their parents really in any situation is because it can be damaging to their mental health to know that they have a lot to live up to, or that you think that they're going to fail. It can be a lot for them to know that you don't have the hope in them to be their own person, and it really damages someone's individuality to know that they are expected to be like someone else. Because think about it. If you want to be your own person and suddenly everyone's like, oh, you're just like your mom, you're just like your dad, like, oh, okay, I was hoping to be not that. I wanted to be myself, but that doesn't always work out when you have an individuality issue and people are telling you you're like your parents all the time. So to go back to the proverb I said at the beginning, children grow up with or without parents, like, children are going to grow up and the pressures from their parents are not going to stop that. The pressures from other people, if they're going to be their parents, are not going to stop that. But it can form who they become. It can form what they decide to do with their lives. Because if they're always expected to do bad like I was, what's the point in keeping good grades? What's the point in being a good student? And what's the point in being nice? What's the point in not, setting something on fire, like in my dad's case, which is a little bit more lighthearted? It just makes people lose the reason that they want to do something, I think, is the biggest takeaway from this. And if you really want to be beneficial to children, congratulate them for their own achievements. Congratulate them for being themselves, for looking nice on a certain day, for cutting their hair a new way, getting new glasses, not saying, oh, wow, you look just like your mom with that haircut, or, oh, wow, you're really starting to act like your dad. I'm starting to see his personality a lot, because that can be damaging to some people, and you never know the situation. So just next time you're about to say something and you think that you're going to compare someone to their parents or to anything, I guess, think about what it could do to them. And if you know the situation's completely different, but sometimes you don't always know. And people can have an effect, and it can have an effect on people that isn't always as positive. And that's really what I want to say. So thank you for listening.